I can assume you've heard of HBO's Velma, a recent Scooby-Doo spin-off slash prequel that's become infamous for how bizarre and controversial its creative decisions were. I can safely assume you're clicking on this because you've already clicked on various Velma bad things over the past few months, and you thus want more Velma bad content in front of your eyeballs. And that's probably fine. I can live with not being first, or second, or even top 10,000 here. If anything, it might actually help us out. Unlike most people, I actually watched all 10 episodes of the show. See, when you're a critic, you can tell when a show is going to get big. And you've got two choices. Jump on it early and say what everyone else is saying, or give it some time and say something a little more thought out. This is me attempting to do that second thing. Velma is the type of show that people like me are supposed to like. I watched a ton of Scooby-Doo as a kid, especially What's New Scooby-Doo and Scooby-Doo Mystery Incorporated. I'm also what both 80-year-old decaying Newsmax boomers and 20-something white Twitch streamers would call a woke scold. I love race swapping characters for fun, just because it pisses off the right kind of people. Every October, I celebrate Blacktober with a rendition of a Black Ryuko Matoi from Kill la Kill. I don't even think Kill la Kill is all that good. I just love taking the most anime that is ever animated and inserting black people into it for my own political agenda. I am the unhinged militant SJW who unironically thinks shows would be better if they had more black people in them and less whiteys. I like political commentary. In fact, I think the less subtle the political commentary, the better. I think whenever shows or movies have a politician that is just a Donald Trump allegory, while it can get a little cheesy and overdone, I would also rather writing that understands what it wants to say than writing that insists that both sides of every issue have good points.
So, what's up?
What's up? Struggle is up, brother. Oppression is up, brother. Salami, eggs, and bacon.
And also, more practically, if we had to wokeify an old cartoon, Scooby-Doo is the perfect candidate for it. Seriously, for a literal half century, every single villain in the show has been a rich white man committing terrorism in an effort to turn a profit. Shaggy, for explicitly political purposes, has always been a vegetarian in the show. Creators that have helmed the property for years have progressively laid the groundwork to explore queerness in characters like Velma, Fred, and Daphne. The show has a history of presenting the police as incompetent and doing more harm than good. The whole show basically stems from 70s hippie counterculture. It is a very natural and logical step to just say, fuck it, go mask off, race bend half the characters, and decide the whole mystery gang has been a racially diverse anarchist polycule this whole time. That is to say, I guess, that I want to be on the record to show that not only did I give Velma a chance, I was rooting for it. If Velma was below average, I still would have defended it for what little it got right. If Velma was bad, I would have still defended its existence for trying something new, even if the execution wasn't there. You have to understand that this is the extent in which I am in favor of Velma. Please understand, for me specifically to not like Velma, the show has to be so catastrophically dysfunctional and counterintuitive that my natural desire to support diversity and risk-taking in media goes completely out the window. The show has to be so bad, and confusingly so, that by the time all 10 episodes happen to you, you find that there's nothing else to do but sit back in your chair and earnestly ask God, what the fuck was the point of that? Anyway, that's the timeline we're in, so buckle up. Let's go for a ride. Hey, so if you like that introduction and you at any point like this video, consider liking and subscribing. I have a new site in the description where I have a description of myself and all my socials. I've been trying to consolidate stuff. It's been quiet on here, I know. But one thing that would help with that quiet is, support on the things that I actually am able to make. It helps justify spending even more time away from my job and stuff like that to help make this work. So I know this channel seems small, but I've actually gotten a couple of requests to do sponsorships already, which is interesting. And sponsorships are not really something that I'd like to do. I would like to be entirely supported by the people who think that my stuff is worth listening to or reading. I'd like to keep it that way. So just consider checking out some of the links in the description, and if not, that's totally okay too. Anyway, back to the video. So I guess I should establish a few ground rules, right? First of all, I don't really care about the show's producer, Mindy Kaling. This is not because she has not said or done questionable things. I mean, she kissed a guy on set without talking about it first, freaked out, and threatened to fire anyone who talked about it. She's an apparent supporter of the far-right anti-Muslim BJP party in India. A lot of her projects touted as South Asian female representation seem to present South Asian women as hairy and ugly introverted beasts that need to change who they are to be accepted. If you think I'm forgetting something, I'm not. I've heard it all, I've read it all. If you thought it, I've been you, etc., etc. It's more for two reasons. First, I'm trying to move away from media criticism that is just a proxy attack on the people that made it. I think a lot of people couple morality, media quality, and media consumption very closely. Morally good people make quality art and consume morally good quality art. Morally bad people make poor quality art and consume poor, morally bad art. And it basically leads to what I would consider pretty awful media analysis. Not too long ago, there was an advice column written in response to a writer in a queer writing group that was told their writing reflected negatively on them as a person because they write horror. And sometimes, get this, violent things happen in horror stories, and the horror characters sometimes do bad things. I won't link it here, but there's a video essay about the cartoon Steven Universe that, in my opinion, correctly criticizes the show in the way it handles tougher political themes like war, fascism, and oppression. But because of these shortcomings, the critic continues to claim that the show's creator, a Jewish non-binary person married to a black man, is actually definitely a Nazi, because the story has problems, and if you write a story with problems, that only happens when you support Hitler. Good people, by contrast, do not write stories with problems, of course. Or take Harry Potter recently. I really liked Harry Potter as a kid. I read the books when they came out, I watched movies as they came out, I clapped in theaters in the Deathly Hallows Part 2 when Bellatrix died. I made Harry Potter wands for my friends in 6th grade out of paper, glue, and paint at recess. They got so popular that the teachers had to take them away because they were worried we would stab each other's eyes out with them. Fast forward years later, and now J.K. Rowling is a totally unhinged fascist who genuinely wants to genocide trans people off the face of the planet, and is using the Harry Potter money she made to make it happen. It's all she cares about now, and it's all she talks about. It's actually kind of impressive how single-minded she is. Anyway, as such, I don't buy or engage with Harry Potter stuff anymore. And in response, there's a lot of video essays critical of Harry Potter. 1-hour essays, 2-hour essays, hell, there's a 10-hour Harry Potter video essay out there. And in a way, the analysis coming out is not only sound, but something I would have agreed with as a kid at 10 or 11 or 12 years old. I never liked how the commentary on Hermione being mixed blood goes nowhere. I never liked how Harry Potter himself wins by basically actuallying the rules of the world. I always thought it was weird that the story ends with him being put in charge of the system that allowed Voldemort to run rampant in the first place. I always thought the goblins were weird. I always thought Cho Chang was kind of hilariously racist name. But clearly the story appealed to people, or it wouldn't have been as popular as it was. But there are people acting like having ever liked Harry Potter is like a forever fascist stain on your soul. And I think it's a little easier to pretend that the quality of something and the politics of consuming something are the same than grapple with the fact that sometimes you like things that bad people make. So let's circle back. I guess my first point is what? Imagine we lived in the other timeline where Velma was genuinely funny, interesting, and good overall. I fear that the general opinion would be that Mindy Kaling would therefore be a good person because the show she produced was good, and therefore kissing someone without their consent and supporting a fascist government in India would be fine because she worked on a good thing instead of a bad thing. After all, a good thing can't be made by a bad person, right? I think separating art from artists is a lazy way to think about the morality of consuming art made by bad people. But I also think that separating the morality of the artist from the morality of the work and from the morality consuming that work is necessary. These three things are related, but they are not all literally the same thing. And when you pretend that they are, you get analysis that, to me anyway, feels lazy and unfocused, and it's often wrong. So that was thing one. So thing two on why we won't focus on Mindy Kaling. Mindy Kaling didn't write or direct any of the episodes of the show. Like, there are so many white men who made Velma the way it is. So fucking many. Why am I being told to pick out the one brown woman with comparatively less direct influence on the creative process and blame her for everything over to people who actively decided to write all those awful weed jokes. Like, why am I to complain about self-inserts only when a brown woman is doing the self-inserting? The Mindy Kaling as character assassination essay seems like a waste of time, and it's definitely already out there if that's what you really want. So, in my opinion, who cares? Second ground rule, I don't care about source material. A lot of the outcry about Velma has been centered around the idea of destroying the legacy of Scooby-Doo or not respecting the source material enough. Oftentimes, videos making this point will complain that the show just should have followed in the footsteps of Scooby-Doo Mystery Incorporated. Now, don't get me wrong, Mystery Incorporated is really good. Arguably one of the greatest renditions of Scooby-Doo ever made. But it is definitely like revisionism, if you can use that word. It's revisionism to say that the reason Mystery Incorporated works so well is because it respects the source material. Mystery Incorporated absolutely shits all over its source material. That iteration of Scooby-Doo takes itself a lot more seriously than anything that came before it. I mean, it's still funny, but less so. A lot of the classic Scooby-Doo gags are toned down. The entire gang was caught up in unending quagmire of relationship drama. The characters like fight for real. They get into arguments. Scooby, Velma, and Shaggy fight. Daphne and Fred fight. The gang almost breaks up at one point. Mystery Incorporated is also a lot more diverse. Yes, the main cast are also white, but the show posits that the gang we know is actually the second iteration of the mystery solving troupe. The original was run by a black female character named Angel Dynamite, who the show just invents out of nothing because it felt like it. Velma is definitely Jewish in this one, and although it was delivered entirely via subtext because it was 2010 and cartoons weren't allowed to be gay until Steven Universe happened, Mystery Incorporated's Velma is the first canonically confirmed gay Velma in the mainline series Scooby-Doo. If anything, Velma, the show, is much closer to being Mystery Incorporated than it is to being Scooby-Doo Where Are You?, the original rendition of the series. They both feature a serial plot, they both feature relationship drama, they both have increased diversity, they both feature a queer Velma. In fact, Velma reads a lot like a misunderstanding of what made Mystery Incorporated work. The show almost entirely exists in the framework of this one specific predecessor. What's the difference? Well, Mystery Incorporated is actually, like, good, right? But that's my point. Mystery Incorporated was good because it dared to treat its source material like a suggestion and make shit up whenever it felt like it. When properties like this take risks and are successful, people act like those new ideas were always there the whole time. But then when they don't work, they complain that it's not enough like the original. I feel like if capitalism is going to do endless reboots of media properties to keep the money flowing in, the least we could do is say that it's completely fine, if not encouraged, to just straight up do something different on the next reboot. Absolutely 0% of this essay will be spent complaining that Velma is too different or not Scooby-Doo enough. It didn't have to be, it just had to be good, which it wasn't, so here we are. Also, a new incarnation being bad doesn't stop you from just rewatching the old, better one. Mystery Incorporated isn't going anywhere. And as an aside, if you want to know what classic Scooby-Doo actually feels like, what you want to watch are the direct-to-video films in the late 90s and early aughts, as well as What's New Scooby-Doo. The latter especially severely underrated in my opinion. It's strictly a modernization of the original series, and while it takes less risk than Mystery Incorporated, I appreciate the humor and dedication to keeping things simple and fun. So we're not talking Mindy Kaling, and we're not talking about how Velma betrays the source material. What else? Can you tell I'm stalling? Oh yeah. I guess a third but more minor point. The problem with Velma is not that Shaggy is black, or Velma is Indian, or Daphne is bi and Asian. In fact, these are probably the few things about the show that are fine. The show isn't bad because it hates men, or it hates white people. Jesus. I don't even want to entertain this kind of reasoning, especially because if you're watching this, you've heard this before. So with that out of the way, I think we can focus on why the show actually doesn't work. Velma makes a terrible mystery. So, like a lot of people, I actually got into Columbo over the past few years. Columbo is an older crime show starring a homicide detective for the Los Angeles Police Department by the same name. It's notable for showing the viewer a seemingly perfect crime and revealing the killer's identity at the start and spending the rest of the runtime on discovering how the killer was caught, instead of who the killer was. Columbo is actually interesting in this context because the show is contemporaneous with Scooby-Doo, and they have some similarities, right? The late 60s and early 70s are a time after the Civil Rights Movement, but before the modern Republican Party really comes into being. The American right has not quite made the switch from outright supporting segregation to being tough on crime, the unstated assumption being that desegregation has brought crime into formerly peaceful white communities. And the only way to protect white children is to give cops tanks and roll them into wherever black people live. Following these transformations, the police and media are also going through a transition during this time. There's this kind of traditional view of the police as a friendly, mostly unnecessary force that only steps in on the rare occasion that someone with way too much time on their hands decides to commit a crime for personal gain. And then there's the more modern depiction of the police in fiction as a standing army ready to enact violence against a horde of usually black or brown criminals.
But you can't just imprison a totally innocent person.
What don't you get about cops?
You can consider how the typical Columbo villain is like some business owner with a yacht who's embezzling money and kills a guy about to rat him out, as compared to the typical Law and Order villain who's usually a serial killer and kidnapper and arsonist with a master's degree in peddling crack.
Bits and pieces. That's all I had a week ago. Nothing really damaging. But now it's starting to all fit together. Oh, you're sharp, Milo. Oh, you're sharp. But once you wipe away all that camouflage, it still adds up to grand larceny.
In fact, in Columbo, it's quite often that the wealthy villain will blame the murder on the poor or the mentally ill, only to be proven wrong time and time again. Scooby-Doo is like Columbo in that the villains are also just rich people getting away with stuff. And like Columbo villains, they will blame ghosts and monsters to distract from what they are doing, only to be proven wrong time and time again. I established this because I want to talk about a few things that make Columbo work so well. And the natural response to that, I'm guessing, is that Columbo and Scooby-Doo are not the same. And as I'm showed, they're actually quite alike. Arguably, Columbo's biggest strength is its protagonist, Lieutenant Columbo. Columbo as a character facilitates the elements needed for a functional mystery show. He has a strong sense of justice, caring first and foremost for the victims of the murders.
Excuse me. How is she?
Well, she'll live, but it was close.
What happened?
Booze, pills, the deadly combination. A neighbor found her.
What are you kidding? Ma'am, what's that supposed to mean?
That magazine. You don't care whether she lives or dies. As a matter of fact, she's drinking because of you, because she thinks you're responsible for the death of her husband. And you want to know something? So do I.
But the sense of justice is not an angry justice. It's more this underlying care for people who are being hurt or taken advantage of. Columbo is also intensely curious, and the show makes it clear how this curiosity about life feeds his skill as a legendary detective. Columbo is much more skeptical than even other professionals in his field. You can tell part of it is intuition, but the stories will show how he backs that intuition up with logical reasoning. Columbo is deeply intelligent in choosing his words and actions. A lot of the best parts of the show are him setting traps for suspects to fall into. It is honestly really entertaining, despite the fact that in real life his behavior would 200% be a violation of people's Fifth Amendment rights. Columbo has these personality traits because there's an understanding by the show's writers that these character traits are necessary for the show to work and stuff. If the protagonist doesn't care about the victims, neither will we. If the protagonist doesn't question the obvious, we as the audience will get frustrated at the stupidity on the screen. Velma's Velma has none of the personality traits needed to make a mystery story function at all. If I were being charitable, I might say that Velma in this iteration of Scooby-Doo is new to mystery solving and out of practice due to plot reasons. I don't expect her to be flawless or even good at it. I just expect her to have the fundamental baseline curiosity, compassion, and logical thinking that would make a mystery story succeed. Velma is deeply skeptical, sure, but not because she values logic in any way, but because she is driven by her biases and refuses to question herself or admit she's wrong. Like other iterations of Velma, but definitely most specifically Mystery Incorporated's incarnation, Velma is snarky, mean-spirited, and condescending. But in Mystery Incorporated, Velma is condescending because she really is smart and her intelligence isolates her from her peers, and the insecurity that creates drives her to be mean. Velma is condescending because she's an idiot and self-serving asshole. The show plays this off as like a fun, quirky little flaw of hers, and you know, in a vacuum, there's nothing wrong with the protagonist who's a little full of herself. But this specific personality flaw doesn't work in this specific genre. What you are telling me is that you wrote a mystery story with a protagonist that is too conceited and too disinterested in the world around her to actually do any mystery solving. And it has major consequences for the plot. For one, Velma keeps sending the wrong people to prison. Like, it happens more than once. She sends Fred to prison because rich white men always commit crimes anyway, and later she swats Shaggy's house because his dad and the killer both own welding masks. She doesn't do any critical thinking for the first 7 or 8 episodes of the show. Most of the time she's not investigating clues, she's being given clues by other people who are doing the thinking for her and just gets shuffled from scene to scene without any of that satisfying clue gathering goodness that takes place in either Columbo or the original Scooby-Doo. Velma doesn't care about other people, period. It is a running gag in the show that Velma basically manipulates Shaggy, only ever hanging out with him when she needs something from him. Velma and Daphne are the main couple in the show, right? But Velma treats her like shit. While Daphne seems to like Velma because of their childhood connection, Velma kind of just wants to fuck Daphne. In part because she's hot, and in part because she sees having a hot and popular girlfriend as something that will increase her own popularity. Actually, there's this one bit where Velma has to dress up like a man. Of course, her newfound male privilege gets to her head. There's supposed to be this contrast of oh, now that she's a man, she's become an entitled asshole who uses people and sexualizes women. But it doesn't work because she is literally already that person all of the time, and it is so painful to watch. Quick plot synopsis, because it's not really that important. We're trying to find Velma's mom that disappeared years ago and catch a serial killer who's been targeting hot girls and taking their brains out. I guarantee you that if this case did not involve Velma's mom specifically, she would not have cared enough to solve it. Daphne's whole thing is her search to find her birth parents. It's kind of poorly written in the conclusion, but otherwise a passable subplot. Anyway, as Velma's maybe girlfriend, there's a point in the story where she just needs Velma to stop for 30 seconds and listen to her vent about her parents. And Velma not only refuses to, but when she gets called out for it, she can barely apologize because she can't actually admit that her girlfriend is a person with human feelings that also matter. At another point, Velma goes through Daphne's journal, shitty, to publicly embarrass Daphne by exposing her struggles with mental health, shitty. And she comes away after reading all of Daphne's most personal thoughts with absolutely no understanding of what she's going through or what's important to her. Why? Because Velma was too busy looking for sexy stuff to care. This is supposed to be a prequel to the Scooby-Doo you know and love, but I can't imagine Scooby-Doo coming from Velma because Velma, the character, does not give a shit about anyone but herself. Velma is a categorically terrible detective. You are writing a detective show. How did you manage to write such an awful detective in your detective show?
But wait, my mom disappeared after finding Dr. Purdue's journals, and the dead girls all had their brains removed. Could they be connected?
Wow, for all your personality flaws, you're actually a pretty good detective.
All the while, the actual progression of the story moves at a glacial pace because, remember, if Velma is too fucking conceited to solve mysteries, she's too conceited to move the plot forward. You're just stuck watching nothing happen for multiple straight episodes until a writer remembers it is a mystery show they are trying to write here, and then a bunch of progress happens artificially at once. It's crazy how fucking bad it is. Yeah, okay. Okay, I'm on tilt, Jesus. I want you to imagine Columbo if Lieutenant Columbo is anything like Velma's Velma, right? Let's say in this episode, the owner of a real estate empire kills an old tenant who is planning on reporting unsafe building conditions to the police. He frames his female secretary by planting evidence that the two had an affair that went south. The landlord turned murderer wears gloves to cover up his fingerprints in a seemingly perfect crime. Enter Lieutenant Velma Columbo. He immediately believes the secretary did it because that's how women are with their emotions and being whores and all that. He spends the next 30 minutes of this 50-minute episode emotionally manipulating a female officer in the force he likes. He gets told multiple times by other detectives that the landlord alibi doesn't actually line up, but he doesn't care because he refuses to believe that he could ever be wrong about anything ever. After the case against the secretary falls apart in court, a different detective entirely finds the key clue that implicates the real culprit. This happens off-screen. Velma Columbo finally admits he may have made a mistake. In the last 5 minutes of the 50-minute episode, he finally accuses the right person, even though he's done none of the work to get us there. The secretary, who's finally free, complains about the trauma, legal fees, and spending nights in jail before the trial. Velma Columbo tells her to shut the fuck up. Roll credits. That sounds like a show that works, I guess. Let's do 10 episodes of this. Oh, by the way, canonically, Velma was a flat earther. So, I mean, I just feel like anyone who's even remotely logical or inquisitive could not possibly be a flat earther, because you can literally go outside and see the curvature of the earth on the horizon, any sunrise, or any ship on the horizon, or a lunar eclipse. You can see those things. The fact that a character who needs to be talked out of a flat earth phase points to a character that is entirely driven by her biases and not observable experiments that she can do, or analyzing the results of those experiments with logical reasoning. Velma is supposed to be a scientist, and she's supposed to be logical. Supposed to, not as in because that's what the source material does, but supposed to in that other Scooby-Doos make her a scientist for the show to work. I guess they figured this absolutely hilarious joke was worth ruining the integrity of the entire script. In Velma, everyone hates each other, and the show hates you. So, Velma in the show is the spiteful, self-centered, condescending asshole, and this really gets in the way of what the show wants to do. Sure, the mystery component and plot progression are completely destroyed because of this fact, but maybe the slice of life Riverdale high school drama stuff works because the other characters are better, right? Right? Unfortunately for us, it was decided to simply make every character the worst person you know, all in totally different ways. The only exceptions are Daphne, kinda, when she's not peddling hard drugs to kids, and Gigi, I guess, who's Shaggy's girlfriend. Oh, Shaggy in the show goes by his given name Norville, but I don't respect the show enough to say that, so Shaggy it is. For this part, let's slow down. Why do tropes exist, like in general? Does anyone know? Is it because writers are all lazy and can't think up of anything new? Well, I don't disagree that lazy writing tends to be full of tropes, but that's not why tropes exist. Tropes exist to solve problems. Why is it that in those anime rom-coms, the main girl always has huge boobs? Are all anime rom-com writers perverts? Maybe. I mean, shoot, I wouldn't rule that out. But rom-coms do need to solve a problem. Specifically, in a world, our world, where people's tastes are diverse, how do I come up with a universally appealing character design that also gives me potential to write sexy scenes without necessarily railroading myself into fetish territory? And a solution to that very common problem is the chick has huge tits now. Is it the only solution? No. Is it necessarily wrong to do? Also no. Could we stand for some diversity in how we solve this problem, and in fictional female body types in general? Yes, please. But the trope exists to solve that problem, right? Or say, why do isekai protagonists always get hit by a truck when they die? Are all isekai lazy and derivative? I mean, yes, they are. But also, having the protagonist get hit by a truck solves common recurring themes with isekai. Specifically, how can I create a death that is sudden and senseless, but also no one's fault? How do I make a death that feels random, but not so random that it's ridiculous? How do I make a death that cleanly sends our protagonist to the new world without having to wonder about what killed him or think about the family and friends he's leaving behind? And for the hit by a truck while saving a little girl variation of this trope, the problem being solved is, how do I quickly show the audience that when push comes to shove, this person is a good person that would risk their life for someone in need when it came down to it? And so now every isekai starts with an elementary school girl jumping into traffic, some nerdy guy with no friends deciding to be a hero, and getting hit by a truck and dying instantly, and the protagonist being reincarnated by some goddess in another dimensional plane. Again, is it the only way to do it? No. But is it common because it solves many of these problems? Yes. Back to Scooby-Doo. Scooby-Doo is tropey. Specifically, it's got tropey group dynamics. Velma's skepticism usually pulls the gang into a mystery. They find some evidence and then get stuck. Fred always splits the team up, Fred, Velma, Daphne on one side and Shaggy, Scooby on the other. Shaggy and Scooby get into hilarious antics. Daphne gets her group into danger, which reveals more clues. Then the two sides get forced together as Velma figures out who it is. Then Fred comes up with a plan, chase scene, optional musical number, and unmasking the bad guy.
You know what? I think I have this mystery just about wrapped up.
Great! Now all we need is a Fred-like trap.
Hey, don't look at me. I just solve these things.
Every single time. But why? What do these tropey dynamics solve? Well, there's two big questions. First, it solves the question of distributing the contributions of your cast. If this were something like Columbo, the one guy would do everything. But here, it's a group of 5. How do you make sure everyone contributes equally? Something you can do is give every group member an assigned role that the audience accepts. Second big thing is group interactions. How do you communicate to the audience that these 5 are friends who work together to solve problems? You can come up with an extremely rigid, if not silly, flowchart for how every mystery is solved that always works. And you can use the fact that both you, the viewer, and the characters understand that these dynamics are consistent to emphasize that these characters are very good friends. It's not the only way to solve these problems, but these are indeed problems that you are trying to solve. Say now you wanted to reimagine Scooby-Doo to be more adult. You could tone down the tropiness if you wanted to, but you would need some other way to A, make sure every cast member feels like they're contributing something, and B, make sure you can still show the group functions well as a group. Velma just totally forgets that these are things that need to be addressed. All 4 main cast members, again, no Scooby, obviously, are as annoyingly edgy as they are completely morally irredeemable. There is no group chemistry in this reincarnation of a cast that is basically defined by their group chemistry. I don't get why Velma basically uses her friends when she needs them and treats them like shit otherwise. I don't get why Shaggy is some cross between a nice guy, a stalker, and a tacky male feminist. I don't get why Fred is a racist, chauvinistic, man-child nepo baby. I don't get why everyone has a crush on Velma. I don't get why we spend the whole season looking for Velma's mom just for her to turn out to be a judgmental asshole. I don't get why any of these people spend any time together at all, let alone why they would actively choose to spend most of their time cramped in a dinky van solving dangerous crimes together for years to come. Now, maybe the writers forewent functional group dynamics to make the show more mature. But is it really mature to simply assume the worst in everyone? I feel like 13-year-olds are the ones who think everyone sucks. Everyone is stupid except for me. I think most adults understand that while there are bad people out there, most people are just trying their best. They have good days and bad days. Good people are there if you look for them. If you find yourself surrounded by assholes all the time, you are the common denominator in that situation. So now everyone is annoying, no one has chemistry with each other, and the show isn't even more mature for it. I was intrigued to learn that Matt Warburton, writer and executive producer of The Simpsons, had a large hand in the creation of Velma. I think it makes a lot of sense. In a show like The Simpsons or Family Guy, it actually doesn't matter if the characters are total jerks. These types of shows are not only completely episodic, but also play fast and loose with canon. Characters will straight up die if it's funny, only to somehow be back the next episode unharmed. It doesn't super matter if the characters are unlikable because it's funny, and the consequences for their assholery will just be reset by the next episode. A lot of Velma is written with jokes that may as well be funny on The Simpsons if we didn't have to live with the consequences later. But we do have to live with the consequences of, say, Velma totally ignoring her girlfriend while she's going through a crisis, or Velma swatting her supposed best friend, because it's not going to get reset, right? This is a serial show. You can't just have people act insane because it would maybe be funny. Velma's politics are shallow and hypocritical. Oh man, I'm going to sound like my least favorite kind of person here, but Velma is a show that, at least on the surface, tries to be woke. Everyone harps on this, right? And as I said at the start, I don't care about being woke. In fact, I welcome woke. What I hate is trying to be woke, but actually being regressive and weird, just to follow that up with pats on the back for how woke you think you are being. I don't want to spend too much time on this point, so I'll just run down a list of things I don't like. I really hate how Shaggy is handled. Just like in general, his character fails on multiple levels. First things first, I don't like how they made him black. Please stick with me here, okay? Why are half the Shaggy jokes in here just about how weird it is that he's both black and a nerd? Like, the show shows you a black man swinging a fantasy sword in his room as if that in and of itself is a joke. Or the fact that a black man doesn't smoke weed is somehow funny and noteworthy. After a lifetime of personally getting "you're the whitest black guy I know" comments for being good at math while black and liking nerdy stuff, it just doesn't sit right. And then later it's implied that he's like this because he's actually mixed race. Shaggy's dad in the show is a beta male white man, which I guess is supposed to explain Shaggy's lack of masculinity that all black men are, I guess, supposed to have by default. It feels fucking racist, okay? Sorry, I wish I had a nicer thing to say. I feel like if any black person read the script during production, they would say the same thing. Velma is supposed to be the South Asian female representation we never had growing up. But the writing around the character is basically dripping with a kind of insecurity that reeks more of racism and fat phobia. I don't actually hate Velma's character design in the show. I think visuals alone, Velma's Velma looks like what you'd expect from a South Asian take on the character. The show as a whole looks pretty good. All the characters are visually well designed, and Velma herself is cute enough. The show apparently disagrees. There are constant references to how ugly she's supposed to be, constant references to her weight and how she's out of shape and gross, constant references to her being hairy since she's brown, I guess. More than one joke where her being Indian is in and of itself the punchline. I don't think being chubby or brown makes you ugly, so it makes me really uncomfortable that the show's going, she's fat and brown, that makes her ugly. You agree, don't you? Look how ugly she is. Ugly, 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 ugly. It's just kind of sexist somehow. Apparently, a lot of Mindy Kaling's South Asian characters are written with this kind of insecure baggage around being too fat and brown and ugly to ever be considered attractive by anyone. But, in my opinion, an equal contributor to this debacle is the writing staff. It's just filled with white dudes who were told to write a woke show but physically cannot, probably because of the aforementioned white maleness. And so this thing happened instead. There is a whole episode, episode 4, where the B-plot is Velma teaching all the hot chicks how to be frumpy and ugly like we're supposed to believe Velma is. Velma takes this to be a feminist endeavor, only to conclude that women can in fact wear makeup and skinny jeans and push-up bras and work out, simply because they want to look a certain way and feel nice, and not because the patriarchy brainwashed them into objectifying themselves. It's a fine point. Only problem is, I've watched plenty of shows, like the anime Jujutsu Kaisen, do this perfectly fine, without any of the other problems Velma has, and without self-righteously patting itself on the back for a job half done. Since Fred remains the only character Velma hasn't race swapped, there's a lot of jokes that I think are intended, an incredibly charitable word to use in this case, intended as social commentary.
I'm just saying, if white people are now the minorities on campus...
Daphne is...
When Velma falsely puts Fred in prison, there are jokes about how society will let white men get away with anything because they're white. However, as I'm sure you can clearly see by what I've just described, this does not work because Fred was falsely put in prison. The situation here is not a representation of how society goes too easy on white people, but how society assumes white people are guilty because of the color of their skin. Especially when there's also a joke about Fred being framed as Hitler because this generation compares everyone to Hitler these days. This again is just like more racism. This is straight up a Ben Shapiro talking point. If it wasn't for the race bending and other surface level gay stuff, conservatives would straight up call this show based. Since we're post the George Floyd protests, the show tries to do some social commentary about how cops are bad, but the writers don't actually believe cops are bad and don't understand Black Lives Matter as a movement, so none of it works. For example, there's a scene where Velma gets run over by a police car that's played for laughs, but in 2020, I watched video of cop cars running over protesters on loop for months on end, so I failed to see how it's funny or what the commentary here is. There were some complaints about sexualizing teenagers. I actually think it's okay in limited situations to portray teenagers having sexual feelings and doing sexual things. I know we were all virgin losers in high school, however, in the real world, teenagers have these feelings and do these things, and it's okay to portray that. Responsibly and censored, of course, using adults in place. I'm not advocating for actual child pornography here. So therefore, I'm not really bothered in a vacuum by scenes in Velma of like teens in showers or twerking or whatever, or the characters making out or finding each other hot. I guess what I'm weirded out by is, again, the social commentary. There are these lines about how in TV lesbians kissing are over-sexualized, followed immediately by Daphne and Velma kissing. The kissing is fine, but now I'm left wondering how much of making Velma and Daphne queer was to explore that interpretation of the characters, and how much was it exploiting lesbians for shock value and sex appeal. because the fucking show brought it up instead of not being weird. Velma is fucking boring. It's been months since the show came out. This was supposed to come out in late February. Part of what happened is I had a string of job interviews that ended in getting a new job, onboarding for the entire month of March, adjusting to a 9 to 5, and having no energy for the entire month of April. But the other part of it is, as much as Velma pissed me off when I watched it, it's so empty and bankrupt as a show. I just don't care about it that much. I just feel that emptiness, I guess. Over the past few years, I've noticed, and I'm sure you have too, the rise of what I've called "I'm not touching you" content. You know that thing the worst guy in school would do where he'd hold up his index finger like a centimeter away from your face, and when you tell him to stop, he'd say, "But I'm not even touching you." It was a lose-lose situation, right? If you told a kid to stop, he won because he'd feed off your frustration. The point was, of course, to make you mad. Your discomfort was entertainment to him. But if you did your best to ignore him, he still won because you were giving him a license to try more annoying and invasive stunts in the future. When I think about Velma, I sort of feel cheated somehow. Like, yeah, the show is pretty clearly bad and worthless. It misunderstands the source material it's adapting. It has no good ideas of its own. And despite the woke framing, it's honestly up there in terms of like the most racist TV shows I've seen. But honestly, Velma is so incoherent and obviously flawed and so filled with self-referential bullshit designed to go viral on Twitter, I can't believe the show is bad because the creators made a genuine effort to make a show and failed. I truly believe there's no other explanation here other than they did this on purpose. More likely, they, the top-level executives, producers, and owners, of course, made a show that was spiteful and controversial on purpose. Usually, in terms of entertainment, even the most cynical of capitalist enterprises will try to make entertainment that panders to a demographic. They'll put up a canceled stand-up comedian and appeal to conservatives. They'll tease two female characters sort of being into each other in a kid's cartoon and say they've reached the queer audience. They'll try and grab the rights to a manga for an adaptation and say they've got the anime demographic and so on. But Velma feels like a more recent capitalist strategy that is somehow even worse than exploiting a minority's desire to be seen in popular culture for profit. Velma is a show that doesn't even bother being for anyone, and it certainly doesn't bother being good. Its real goal is to just piss people off and get people talking about how pissed off they are. The tricky thing about shows is that they need fans to be successful. But this show tries to circumvent that with the knowledge that if it's viral on Twitter and TikTok, people will watch it anyway, regardless of the reason it's viral. And the money you get from a hater is actually worth the same as the money you get from a diehard fan. Velma was the most watched HBO Max premiere of an animated show ever. Ever. An unimaginable number of people watched the show, including yours truly, and absolutely no one had a good time. Velma is like anti-entertainment. It exists to purposely make everyone's day a little bit worse, to purposely rile up racists online. It purposely gets these racists tweeting and arguing and trolling. It purposely makes the internet a worse place to be for months as these racist trolls clog the internet with their takes on how Western woke media is collapsing before our eyes because Velma is brown and gay and fat now. And then everyone gets angry at the racists, and then they realize the show still sucks, so they need to show that they hate Velma, but not because they're racist or anything, but because the show is actually bad. And like the kid whose finger is infuriatingly close to your cheek, these producers win no matter what. If people genuinely liked it, it would have been proof that this kind of targeting actually has a fan base that wants more of it. But if everyone hated it, like we did, it's still a success because the show still made a fuck ton of money from people watching it on purpose to be miserable online. I'm definitely including myself in the group of people I'm criticizing. I don't know. I don't think it's right to not talk about bad art now just because we're seeing art be bad on purpose to try and turn a profit. But I wonder if maybe if we started recognizing that that is what is happening, we'd have more useful conversations. At least torrent the fucking episodes, for Christ's sake, at the very least. Why help it reach the most watched animated premiere on the platform of all time? Seriously? Ugh. I think the saddest part about Velma is that I know for a fact there were people who worked very hard on the show and who had good ideas. And they were all totally ignored to pursue a strategy of spreading bedlam and misery for money. An artist came forward with designs she came up with for the concept art stage of the show. And other than preferring how dark-skinned the actual show made Velma and Shaggy, the designs are really good. They have an actual consistent style that the current iteration doesn't have. This is because they were designed by an artist that wants to make good things and not bad things that get everyone upset and annoyed. I just feel like Velma is a case study for how these higher-ups treat talent, not as people who are contributing to an artistic work, but as machines that crank out a product some suit with a graph thinks will make XYZ profit next quarter. And now we live in a world where a show no one likes is slated for a season 2, whereas shows like Close Enough and Infinity Train are canceled. These executives are making more money than ever before by peddling worse content to the masses and paying the people forced to make it less and less. It's a downward spiral. For a while now, politics in the United States has shifted from rallying around things you like to getting extremely angry at things you hate. I just think it's kind of fucked that entertainment is going that way too. There's no relief from it. No one makes enough money. There's a fucking trans genocide in progress. We're spending more money on weapons for Ukrainian Nazis than death relief for our young people who just want an education. And when you turn on the TV to take your mind off of it, everything is just boring and infuriating all of the time because our entertainment is not even concerned with making anyone happy, but compelling you to spend money so you complain about what everyone else is complaining about. This malaise somehow became our new normal. And me personally, I think some way, somehow, we should not accept this, though it truly beats me how to reject any of this in a way that makes a difference. Anyway, a benefit in being this late on this essay is that I can direct you to throw some money and some support towards the ongoing Writers Guild of America strike, where American TV and film writers are on strike demanding, among other things, a compensation model that actually shares the enormous profit streaming makes with the workers who made it possible, as well as protection from so-called generative AI. The most direct way you can help the striking workers is through the Entertainment Community Fund. If you're unfamiliar with how showing solidarity to a strike works, basically, if you go on strike, of course you will stop getting paid, and if the strike goes on for long enough, people will run out of money for bills, and the strike will be forced to end before the strikers' demands are met. So, a donation, if you can, would be impactful. Also, don't boycott random things. The WGA hasn't called for that. Show actual solidarity, not showboating. And I'll see you next time.
He called the program the Special Covert Operations Brain Initiative, or Scooby.
Scooby? And wait, what did Scooby do?
On her back, kicking her legs, from the waist, down, up, down, up.
Now she's thin again.
Well, she was never exactly thin. But I wouldn't let her because I happen to like a woman that